Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show. That looks rather otherworldly, I have to say. Hang on. No? Okay. I guess that's what it's going to look like. Okay, this is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is KMG show for Thursday, November the 18th, 2021. In about 90 minutes, I will be discussing Peter Brook's film adaptation of William Golding's Lord of the Flies. But let's begin with the Kenosha Clown show. And we still don't have a verdict. God knows how long this will last. The rumors is that there are two members of the jury who are determined to convict Kyle Rittenhouse of something, whatever that might be, and 10 members of the jury who are determined that he should go free. So let's have the latest from Reuters. Nathan Lane. Jurors in the Wisconsin murder trial of Kyle Rittenhouse will deliberate for a third day on Thursday, picking up after they reviewed a series of videos of the teenager killing two men and wounding a third during racial protests last year. Obviously, Reuters made a mistake, and it should say Friday. Rittenhouse, 18, is charged with killing Joseph Rosenbaum, 36, and Anthony Huber, 26, an attempted homicide in the wounding of Gage Grosskreutz during a chaotic night of protests in Kenosha, Wisconsin on August the 25th, 2020. So, we have a riot at the Capitol in Washington, D.C. on January 6th, but somehow this becomes an insurrection. What happened in Kenosha, Wisconsin on August 25th, 2020, and also before and after, was rioting. It was violent rioting with many things being burned, cars being burned out, businesses burned down. But Reuters cannot bring itself to call what happened in Kenosha riots. No, instead, a chaotic night of protests. The jury of 7 women and 5 men has so far spent roughly 14 hours weighing 2 weeks of testimony, which included considerable evidence in support of Rittenhouse's assertion that he used his weapon after being attacked. He faces life in prison if convicted on the most serious charge. For the last hour on Wednesday, the jury rewatched videos in evidence, including drone footage of the Rosenbaum shooting and videos of the subsequent shootings of Huber and Grosskreutz and the attempted shooting of an unidentified male. Rittenhouse, who was 17 at the time of the shootings, has pleaded not guilty and testified last week that he fired his weapon in self-defense. He said Rosenbaum, the first person he shot that night, grabbed the barrel of his gun. Defense lawyers made a new request for a mistrial Wednesday, saying prosecutors withheld the high-definition version of a drone video and evidence and enhanced it in order to portray Rittenhouse as a threat. Prosecutors denied the defense's allegation. The shootings took place in Kenosha during protests. Again, yes. Oh, the protests were marred by arson, rioting, and looting that followed the police shooting of a black man, Jacob Blake, who was left paralyzed from the waist down. And Reuters neglects to mention why the police shot Jacob Blake, because that would not make Jacob Blake look like a hero or a martyr. So let's see what they have at Legal Insurrection. Andrew Branca. Yes, proceeding court session involved an NBC reporter caught following the jury bus. I'll have more on that shortly. Interesting news story from 2015. Man killed by skateboard. Man dies after being hit in head with skateboard during fight in Santa Ana Starbucks. We all know why Antifa carries skateboards, because they're weapons. They can be used as weapons, quite serious ones. But, oh, it's a skateboard, and I love to skateboard. I'm a skateboarding dude. That's what they call plausible deniability. And apparently, internet sleuths are looking closely at the laptop of the lead prosecutor, found video conversion software on it. Let's go to Fox News, which also talks about the break and the return. Judge Schroeder granted one juror's request to take copies of the instructions home with them and noted that the 36 pages are complicated. I don't know about you guys. I watch a little TV in the morning and in the evening, and some of the greatest legal minds in the country, I'm delighted to say, agree with us that the instructions are very confusing, the judge told the prosecution and defense. Defense attorney Mark Richards was hesitant about jurors taking the instructions home. He said, I'm afraid it's going to be the old dictionary game, and they start defining words and things like that outside research. That's my concern. NBC News said Thursday that a freelancer, quote, never intended to contact, unquote, the Rittenhouse jurors, but did not deny that he may have been following the jury van on Wednesday evening. An NBC spokesperson told Fox, last night a freelancer received a traffic citation. While the traffic violation took place near the jury van, the freelancer never contacted or intended to contact the jurors during deliberations and never photographed or intended to photograph them. We regret the incident and will fully cooperate with the authorities on any investigation, unquote. Judge Schroeder said Thursday morning that the freelancer was following the jury van from about a block away at the direction of an MSNBC booking producer when he ran a red light and was pulled over. The judge said he was ticketed for violating a traffic control signal. He's not here today, from what I'm told, and I've instructed that no one from MSNBC News will be permitted in this building for the duration of his trial. This is a very serious matter, and I don't know what the ultimate truth of it is, but absolutely, it would go without much thinking that someone who is following the jury bus, that is an extremely serious matter and will be referred to the proper authorities for further action. Somehow the statement from NBC neglected to mention the claim from the man who was ticketed. His name was James or Jim Morrison, that he had been instructed by an MSN producer in New York to follow the jury van. Curious, wouldn't you say? Certainly I would. But why? Why following the jury bus? Well, intimidation would be one reason. Hey, jurors, you better come to the right decision, that is, convict Rittenhouse, or we're going to let the whole world know who those evil men and women were who set him free. It's been obvious since the O.J. Simpson trial back in, 1995, was it? That the trials are both private, that is to say, in the courtroom, and public. That jurors are certainly swayed by what is called the court of public opinion. And as we saw in the trial of Derek Chauvin, the Minneapolis Star-Tribune made it clear that all the jurors were going to be identified. They gave enough information about the jurors so that it would have been fairly easy, again, for internet sleuths to come up with their names and possibly their addresses. Again, the message was clear. Come up with the right verdict or you will be in serious trouble. And the woman, the producer who supposedly ordered the freelancer to follow the jury bus, has a curious name, Irene Minju Bayan. And after the story became public, she nuked all of her social media accounts, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook. Golly, if she did nothing wrong, why does she have to hide? We have some more information about that night in August of 2020 from the Daily Mail. Now, Paul Johnson, the well-known English journalist, who was once editor of the New Statesman, once said, nothing beats news in a newspaper, but modern newspapers don't agree with Johnson, the Daily Mail being one example. The Daily Mail delivers a lot of news that no American publication would, because a lot of the news that the Daily Mail comes up with tends to disrupt what they call the narrative. Exclusive jump kick man who was filmed kicking Kyle Rittenhouse in the head before the teen shot at him is revealed as a career criminal with an open domestic violence charge for throwing his girlfriend to the ground and attacking her. A career criminal and convicted felon with an open domestic violence charge has claimed to be the unidentified male at whom Kyle Rittenhouse shot twice at close range but missed on the night of August 25th, 2020. Rittenhouse has been charged with first-degree recklessly endangering safety of the man, known in trial only as Jump Kick Man, for the flying kick he took at the teenager's head as Rittenhouse was attacked minutes after he shot Rosenbaum dead. Now, Maurice Freeland has admitted that he was the one who kicked Rittenhouse in the head and narrowly avoided being shot as a result, after the then 17-year-old stumbled to the ground as he attempted to flee. Moments later, Anthony Huber swung at Rittenhouse with his skateboard for a second time, grabbing for the AR-15 that was slung across his chest. Rittenhouse fired once, shooting Huber in the chest at point-blank range. Gage Grosskreutz was next, advancing on Rittenhouse with a Glock 27 in his hand. The state has painted all these actors as heroes, attempting to take down a, quote, active shooter. The Daily Mail has already revealed that both Huber and Grosskreutz have lengthy and violent criminal histories, with the latter having a history of lying to police. And of course, Joseph Rosenbaum was a child rapist. Yes, that's one of those heroes. The 36-year-old had been released from a mental facility earlier that day and was still carrying the plastic bag of possessions with which he'd been discharged. Diagnosed with a variety of mental health issues, including bipolar disorder, he had been admitted for attempting suicide and was not permitted to stay with his fiancée as she had a restraining order against him. A convicted felon whose criminal history includes pedophilia, the court heard that Rosenbaum was aggressive and out for trouble that night. He got in people's faces, yelling and screaming, shouted, "Shoot me," N-word, repeatedly, and appeared triggered by people who put out a flaming dumpster that he was attempting to push onto the street. At one point in the night, he armed himself with a chain taken from a flatbed trailer that had also been set on fire. At another, he took the t-shirt he was wearing and wrapped it around his face. Yes, some hero. It's a curious thing how Antifa seems to draw so many criminals to it, particularly sexual offenders. You know, I was talking earlier this week about the now famous essay by Tinkszorg, as he calls himself on Twitter, on a upcoming civil war in the United States. Well, we know that Antifa would bring out its battalions in this civil war, and they are certainly brave men, but most of them, certainly judging by the photos that the Portland Police Service has released, are deranged. So they would seem to lack a discipline. This is from Steve Watson at Summit News. In comments on his Wednesday night show, Tucker Carlson addressed a video posted by perpetual race baiter and segregationist Joy Reid, who declared that Kyle Rittenhouse cried white tears during his trial and that it goes hand in hand with white vigilantism. In a post to TikTok, Reid stated, quote, "In America, there's a thing about both white vigilantism and white tears, particularly male white tears. Really, white tears in general, because that's what Karens are, right? They Karen out, and then as soon as they get caught, bring waterworks. White men can get away with that too, and it has the same effect." This Kyle Rittenhouse trial, it reminded a lot of people of something. Oh, the Brett Kavanaugh hearings, in which Brett Kavanaugh, who had been accused of committing sexual abuse of her, cried his way through the hearings to make him a permanent member and associate justice of the United States Supreme Court. and his tears turned out to be more powerful than the tears of Christine Blasey Ford, which were the tears of the alleged victim. And I'm looking at a picture of Joy Ann Reid's ugly and grossly stupid face. Carlson commented, "So that is a currently employed MSNBC anchor, another Harvard graduate, not an employee of a Radio Rwanda. White tears, she mocks the very idea. People that evil can't cry. They don't have human emotions because they're not really human. You don't have to care about them. They don't qualify for your compassion. You can laugh as they weep and feel good about it. You often hear the word dehumanize," Carlson continued, adding, "What does it mean? That's what it looks like. So you wonder how long this can go on in our country before something really breaks." Miranda Devine had commented, "They try to make the Rittenhouse case about race, but it's about class. Wealthy elitists like Joy Reid and Joe Scarborough and Joe Biden punch down at the white working class son of a single mother because they don't see him as fully human, and it makes them feel good." Just a reminder that the Reverend Al Sharpton of Tawana Brawley infamy, who also incited 2 honest-to-God pogroms in New York City after Pat Buchanan was fired because of a book on the Great Replacement that he had published, guess who they hired to replace him? The Reverend Al Sharpton. Such an outstanding American. We have a piece from Joel Pollack on Breitbart. 10 media myths exploded during the Kyle Rittenhouse trial. 1, white supremacist. There was never any evidence that Rittenhouse was a white supremacist, even by the time Biden made that false claim in September. The owners of the car dealership who asked Rittenhouse and others for help were Indian American. Number 2, Rittenhouse shot first. Actually, a rioter named Joshua Zeminski was the first to fire shots during the fateful melee at the car dealership that Rittenhouse had rushed to protect. 3, Rosenbaum was a peaceful protester. Yes. Even after this claim, Assistant District Attorney Thomas Binger had to admit that Rosenbaum had been committing violent acts that night, including setting things on fire and using the N-word to threaten other people. Number 4, Rittenhouse was never in danger. Even the prosecution acknowledged that Rittenhouse was trying to save his own skin, as if that were a bad thing. So ADA James Krause tried a new strategy. He argued that the defendant should have allowed himself to be attacked rather than shoot because, quote, everybody takes a beating sometimes, unquote. Wow, isn't that what Ray Liotta said in Goodfellas? Number 5, the victims were unarmed. Rosenbaum did not attack Rittenhouse with a weapon, although he wielded a chain earlier in the evening. But Anthony Huber smashed Rittenhouse over the head with a skateboard twice, and Gage Grosskreutz, who was wounded, had a pistol that he was not even licensed to carry. Grosskreutz testified that he had pointed the gun at Rittenhouse before the defendant fired, a shocking admission that seemed to confirm Rittenhouse's self-defense argument. Number 6, Rittenhouse broke gun laws. PolitiFact even ran a fact check against the claim that he was perfectly entitled to have his AR-15 rifle. But as prosecutors eventually admitted, Rittenhouse was legally in possession of the rifle because he was over the age of 16 and it was long-barreled. It was also kept at a friend's house in Wisconsin. Number 7, Rittenhouse crossed state lines. It is true that Rittenhouse is from Antioch, Illinois, but he was working last summer as a lifeguard in Wisconsin and his father lives in Kenosha, a fact that tripped the prosecution when they tried to portray Rittenhouse as a kind of outsider, a chaos tourist who neither cared about nor was familiar with the local community. Oh, and here's some wisdom from Ayanna Pressley, who is bald because of a skin disease. Frightening visage. A 17-year-old white supremacist domestic terrorist drove across state lines armed with an AR-15. He shot and killed 2 people who had assembled to affirm the value, dignity, and worth of Black lives. Fix your damn headlines. Number 8, Rittenhouse's mother drove him to the riot. This myth, still propagated by CNN, was exploded at the trial. She was not even in the state. Rittenhouse arrived on the scene with other people, as even the prosecution admitted during the trial. Number 9, Rittenhouse came to kill. Rittenhouse's own testimony provided strong evidence that he'd come to help. He offered medical assistance to rioters, even though he lied about being qualified to do so, and did not shoot anyone who did not attack him. One witness testified that Rittenhouse had even de-escalated a conflict. Number 10, the Kenosha protests were peaceful. The jury saw lengthy footage of riots. What they did not see, but which emerged in media reports during the trial, was that the alleged victims all had criminal records. That would not in itself justify the shootings, but the high proportion of convicted violent criminals among the peaceful protesters was a revelation. Let's go to the chat. Okay, I apologize. I muted and forgot to unmute. It won't happen again. Okay, let's look at the chat. Hello to Anrun, respectable commenting name, Chokakin666, who says, I'm Piggy. Quacholango asks about the talks with the estate lawyer. I will get to that shortly. Hello to Brandon Smith and William Hicks. Hello to Professor Paul, Kekvapajavaitya. And hello to Chad Chadson, our valiant moderator. Thank you for your service. Respectable commenting name says, yes, Karen has just asked if she can do extra homework tonight, and the judge just allowed it. What a swell guy and not a lazy, idiotic boomer. Anrun thinks there's going to be a mistrial, and Brandon Smith says Kyle got to be targeted. Anrun says 5 women and 2 Karens. Okay, hello to Head McNeck. And Kontiki Roulette. Brandon Smith says Karens can convict him and sentence him to stand in the corner and think about how his actions upset them. William Hicks says we need skateboard controlled, maybe a registry, annual fee, etc. Anrun says Kyle has not gotten the best defense in this trial. That is for sure. I apologize for this. Nobody calls me, but now there have been 2 calls during the show. Perhaps they'll leave a message. Hello to Red Sulfur. And Metal Mike, who says, darn that Jim Morrison dances the Snake King, the Lizard King, as he was called, is at it again. John S. says, I heard that the video software was Handbrake, and that as far as I know, it's primarily used to compress videos. Hello to Ricardo Williams. I sent you a DM with a story in the New York Post about Kim Kardashian dating Pete Davidson. Oh, okay. Yes. Wow, that Pete Davidson is quite the ladies' man, even though he looks like he is literally dying. He's one of the ugliest people that I've ever seen, and he has no discernible talent. And yet, there it is. Hello to Dubereus, John S. Anrun says, I love that scene in The Untouchables where Capone bashes a guy's head in with a skateboard. Looks like we're the Indians now, says Brandon Smith. And who else do we have here? Ashimane Bravo says, is Ron DeSantis signing anti-vaccine mandate bills in the city of Brandon, Florida, the ultimate troll? Ricardo Williams says, John S., the minor attracted person meme slowly creeping towards acceptance has caused a lot of mental Fed posting. And Ricardo Williams adds, by 2030, it'll be impolite to use the term pedophile. Hello to Quittin Time. Kyle Rittenhouse will be sprung from prison by a posse of patriots, says Ricardo Williams. How long did it take for the jury to deliberate during the O.J. Simpson trial? It didn't even take a day. It took a couple of hours. I was at work at my magazine, and we heard that the jury was coming in with a verdict, and we were rather shocked. And Colby Kosh, who I worked with, and he also lived in the house full of other reporters, which I dubbed the Flop House. I told him OJ is going to be found not guilty, and he was furious with me. I mean, how could that happen? I said, look, if OJ is convicted, he's going to be sentenced to life in prison, and a jury is not going to deliberate a couple of hours and then sentence a man to life in prison. And we were watching the television at our home, and we saw the verdict, and I've never seen a man's face fall harder than Colby Kosh's. Hello to a Jim N-word. Most of them have weird asymmetric faces, says Red Sulfur. Ricardo Williams says, here's the thing about turning MAP into a sexuality. You can't discriminate against them being hired in schools. John S. says, I'm starting to like all Tink Zorg. And Red Sulfur says, bottom of the barrel, commies in the USSR and Cuba used riffraff as stormtroopers in public areas as well. William Hicks says, Antifa is basically a bunch of berserkers frequently armed with skateboards. Okay. 4 hours in the OJ trial, says Head McNeck. Okay. Hello to Half Galician. And who is more repulsive, Krause or Binger? Who's the fellow who's being compared? I didn't catch this at first. Being compared to some huge person, some monstrously large person in Dune? Because I've seen that comparison made many times. And Ricardo Williams says, LOL, I knew Kevin would love the Pete Davidson story. Well, I'll repeat what I've said previously, that I believe the only reason why he's still on Saturday Night Live is because of the belief that he might actually collapse and die live on TV. Yeah, fat lock, says Ricardo Williams. Yeah. Okay. So I had an appointment this morning at 10:30 with the lawyer for my father's estate. I had been authorized to do this by my brother, who's the executor, because the lawyer had been dodging my brother's calls and emails for something like 6 weeks. So this must have lit a fire under him, because just before I got to the building, my brother called and said that the lawyer had called him and an agreement had been made. And the agreement is this. There's some sort of certificate from Canada Revenue Agency or whatever, which is required. Well, it's not actually required. The thing is there may be some amount of tax that they may claim, although my father's income tax has been thoroughly paid. No question about that. All of the taxes have been paid, property tax and all the rest of it. But the decision is that part of the settlement to the 3 people who have not got their shares, and I'm one of them, and my brother is another, would be released in a couple of weeks. Now, a couple of weeks, that could mean 2 weeks, could mean 3 weeks, could mean 4 weeks. I don't know. But so the situation that I'm in now is that in a couple of weeks, I will be receiving sufficient funds such that I don't have to worry about being made homeless every month. I am worrying about being made homeless in 6 days' time because that's when I have to pay another month's rent here, and I am short of funds. So I know you're probably tired of hearing me say this, but I would greatly appreciate it if some of you kind souls could send donations to the live stream. My PayPal account is linked to Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. Once again, Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. And if you were in Canada, donations to the live stream may be made directly via interact@kevingrace@shaw.ca. And thank you to all of the kind people who have already donated. So let's get back to it here. This is an opinion piece by Keisha N. Blaine, MSN opinion columnist. Isn't it funny how MSN just keeps coming up all the time? And just let me increase the size of this. Keisha N. Blaine is an award-winning historian and writer. She is an associate professor of history at the University of Pittsburgh and written extensively on, wait for it, race, gender, and politics in national and global perspectives. Her most recent book is Until I Am Free, Fannie Lou Hamer's Enduring Message to America. So Ahmaud Arbery trial today, 100 plus Black clergy assemble to show support. Yeah, I suppose this could be seen as an attempt at intimidation. Professor Blaine begins last week during the trial of the three white men, boo, accused of murder in the death of Ahmaud Arbery. An attorney representing one of the defendants, Kevin Guff, voiced concern about the Reverend Al Sharpton being present in the courtroom to support the victim's family. Referring to Sharpton's high-profile status, Guff told Judge Timothy Walmsley that Sharpton's presence was intimidating, and it's an attempt to pressure or influence the jury. He went a step further, though, and said, "We don't want any more Black pastors coming in here trying to influence the jury in this case." Though Sharpton, the host of MSNBC's Politics Station, is not the pastor of a church, Guff's offensive remarks and his lackluster apology are in keeping with the common misperception that Black religious leaders should only be seen or heard from the pulpit. Is she seriously expecting us to believe that this is a thing, that Black leaders are constantly reminding us that they are reverends? And so the implication being is that their opinions on race and politics have the authority of the voice of God. Keisha Blaine continues, Black religious leaders have long played a crucial role in shaping American law and politics. Their active involvement in civil rights cases has demonstrated their belief that they are called not just to address the spiritual needs of a congregation, but also to address the community's social and political concerns. As Jamar Tisby, author of How to Fight Racism, Courageous Christianity, and the Journey Toward Racial Justice, told me, Black pastors have not only represented Black people from the pulpit, but also in local, state, and national elected office. Tisby added that those clergy decided that part of their role as spiritual leaders was to serve as political leaders as well. And then we hear about Ida B. Wells, the NAACP. And okay, how about this? Oh, yes. The Reverend, but not Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the pastor at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Alabama, was selected as the leader of the Montgomery Improvement Association to coordinate the Montgomery bus boycott after Rosa Parks' arrest. King and other clergy eventually founded the Southern Christian Leadership Conference in 1957 to train and assist local community activists. Oh, and then we hear about Malcolm X, who was murdered. And who murdered Malcolm X? We all know who called for the murder of Malcolm X, and everyone has known this since 1965, but we're all supposed to tiptoe around it. I will remind listeners of something they may already know, that the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was not only a plagiarist, he was an orgiast and an aider and abetter of rape. Some hero. Some hero. And, oh, yes, funny things. Well, let's say strange things happen in courts all the time. Inexplicable decisions. And here's one from the Washington Post. A New York man who pleaded guilty to rape and sexual abuse for assaulting 4 teenage girls during parties at his parents' home will not face jail time after a judge on Tuesday sentenced him to 8 years probation. Niagara County Court Judge Matthew Murphy said he agonized over the case of 20-year-old Christopher Belter, who was accused of committing the crimes when he was 16 or 17. Belter pleaded guilty in 2019 to a series of felony charges that included third-degree rape and attempted first-degree sexual abuse, as well as 2 misdemeanor charges of second-degree sexual abuse. Although Belter faced a maximum sentence of 8 years in prison, Judge Murphy concluded that jail time for the man, quote, would be inappropriate, unquote, in a ruling that shocked the courtroom. Murphy said, I'm not ashamed to say that I actually prayed over what is the appropriate sentence in this case because there was great pain. There was great harm. There were multiple crimes committed in the case. It seems to me that a sentence that involves incarceration or partial incarceration isn't appropriate, so I'm going to sentence you to probation, unquote. Belter of Lewiston, New York, will have to register as a sex offender as part of his sentence. Murphy told Belter in court that the probation sentence would be, quote, like a sword hanging over your head for the next 8 years, unquote. The judge did not elaborate on why he did not impose a jail time. Stephen Cohen, attorney from one of the victims, denounced the judge's sentencing, saying to reporters Tuesday, justice was not done here. He told the Washington Post that his client, who was joined by some of the other victims in the courtroom, was deeply disappointed in the sentencing. My client threw up in the ladies' room following the sentencing, Cohen said. If Chris Belter was not a white defendant from a rich and influential family, in my experience, he surely would have been sentenced to prison. He is tremendously remorseful for what he has done, says Barry Covert, Belter's attorney. The crimes took place between February 2017 and August 2018 at Belter's parents' home in the wealthy neighborhood of Lewiston, a few miles outside Niagara Falls. During that time, 3 16-year-olds and a 15-year-old girl were assaulted in 4 separate incidents. The party house label at Belter's family home was fueled by his mother, Tricia Vacanti, now 50, his stepfather, Gary Sullo, 56, and Jessica Long, 42, a family friend who allegedly supplied teen girls with alcohol and marijuana, according to state police. The 3 adults, who police say helped groom the women for sexual assaults by Belter, have pleaded not guilty in Lewiston Town Court to misdemeanor charges of child endangerment and unlawfully dealing with a child. Yes, as I say, one cannot really extrapolate general principles from individual court cases because they are so often surprising. You may have seen in the last week a video, an old report from the BBC that went viral. And it shows a pretty young woman dressed in a miniskirt. This is circa 1967, who walks up to men on the streets or courthouse steps or whatever and pinches them on the bottom. And then she asks the men how they feel about this. And most of them say that they were shocked. And then she asks them whether they believe in the full equality of women. And most of the men say no. Actually, this woman later went on to become a member of Nigel Farage's Brexit party. But of course, you get a good look at this woman, and my own reaction was, well, how do I feel about people pinching my bottom? Well, if it were that woman, I don't think I would be that upset. Brendan O'Neill writes at Spiked, I'm confused. When women say they've been sexually abused, should we listen to them or not? The signals are befuddling. Right now, we're being told to heed women. Tory MP Carolyn Noakes' claim that Boris Johnson's dad, Stanley, once smacked her bum has hit the headlines. It feels like a Me Too comeback. Stanley's allegedly wandering hands are proof that sexual harassment remains rife in the corridors of power, we're told. And yet when some lesbians told the BBC a few weeks ago that they've been sexually hounded by trans women, that is biological males, they were essentially told to shut the hell up. take down this heretical article. That's a quote, woke mabs yelled at the Beeb. The narrative changes with alarming speed. 1 minute it's believe women, the next is won't someone shut these bitches up. Noakes and also a New Statesman columnist who likewise say Johnson Sr. groped her once have been treated sympathetically and respectfully. The liberal press has taken up their cause. They've trended in a good way, that is, very much unlike the lesbians who told their stories about being pressured into having sex with women with penises. They trended in a bad way. Hashtag STFU. There was even a protest at BBC headquarters about the article it published. We demand that the BBC retract the article, one placard said. This is surely the first time in the modern era that people have publicly agitated for the silencing of women's stories about abuse. Sexist pigs take note. If you want to tell women to pipe down, pop on a dress first. Trans people's feelings clearly trump the right of lesbians and other women to sexual safety. They sure got powerful in a hurry, didn't they? These trans people. So let's look at some headlines from Drudge. Shock poll, Biden approval drops to 36%. I don't understand. He's the most popular president in American history, as proved by his victory in the November 2020 presidential election. But a third of healthcare workers reject vax mandate. 40% of TSA agents reject it. Army to begin forcing out soldiers who refuse. NFL star accused of obtaining fake card. Patients airlifted out of Boston due to hospital shortage. FDA wants 55 years to process FOIA request over data. Million Americans may have permanently lost sense of smell. Conflicts mount on easing restrictions amid infection spikes. Merkel to usher in tighter rules with Germany, engulfed Germany. Limit public life for unjabbed Czechs, Slovaks join crackdown. Remember when we were told about 2 weeks to flatten the curve? Man, good times, good times. It seems to me that the air has gone out of this balloon, the hysteria balloon. I mean, if you're looking at it factually, this is the sunk cost fallacy. These things have not worked. They may even be seen as counterproductive, but we're going to continue them. In fact, we're going to make them stronger. Why? Because it would be a tremendous embarrassment for these people to admit that they were wrong, disastrously wrong. Because if they admitted this, then the question would arise, why are you still in public life? Why haven't you retired to a monastery or decided to raise peacocks or something like that? This is from dailyskeptic.org. Deputy First Minister of Scotland, John Swinney, is under pressure to scrap vaccine passports after a new Oxford study found that the double-jabbed are just as likely to pass on COVID to unvaccinated people. The London Times has more. Quote, the effectiveness of vaccines in curbing transmission, particularly with AstraZeneca doses, wanes over time, according to a study that appears to undermine the reasoning behind new laws requiring proof of vaccination to enter football grounds and nightclubs. It comes as the Deputy First Minister said customers may now be required to show a negative COVID test as well as a vaccine certificate before being allowed to attend more indoor venues, including pubs, restaurants, gyms, and cafes. However, this theoretical option has prompted a backlash from pubs and restaurants who claim they face an avalanche of cancellations if approved. Revelations about the reduced effectiveness of vaccines after 12 weeks was highlighted in research led by the Nuffield Department of Medicine, based at the University of Oxford, which co-developed the AstraZeneca vaccine. It found vaccinated people were almost as infectious as the unvaccinated 12 weeks after their second AstraZeneca jab. The paper stated, quote, transmission reductions declined over time since second vaccination for Delta, reaching similar levels to unvaccinated individuals by 12 weeks for AstraZeneca and attenuating substantially for Pfizer-BioNTech. Protection from vaccination in contacts also declined in the 3 months after second vaccination, unquote. The paper echoes research in The Lancet last month, which found the vaccine effect on reducing transmission is minimal in the context of Delta variant circulation. Sweeney acknowledged the research, but pledged to press on with vaccine passports in clubs and sports stadiums and continue to consult businesses on expanding them to other settings. Yes, in other words, the beatings will continue until morale improves. So what's the latest information from Ontario, which is Canada's most populous province, with a population of 14.8 million. Ontario is reporting more than 700 new COVID infections today. This is from Cody Wilson at CP24, the highest daily case count recorded in the province in nearly 2 months. Provincial health officials logged 711 new COVID cases today, up from 512 on Wednesday and 642 1 week ago. It is the highest single-day tally reported since September the 24th, when 727 new infections were confirmed. 5 more virus-related deaths were confirmed today, bringing Ontario's COVID-19 death toll to 9,955. Again, this is over a period of almost 2 years in a province of 14.8 million people. Of the new cases confirmed today, 322 involve those who are unvaccinated. 314 are in those who are fully immunized. 28 are in individuals who are just partially vaccinated, and 47 involve people with an unknown vaccination status. You may have heard my prediction that shortly the majority of new cases of COVID in Ontario would come from the vaccinated. And this prediction became true rather quickly. But never mind that. Amanda Connolly of Global News reports Health Canada is expected to announce Friday that it has approved the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine for use in Canadian children between the ages of 5 and 11, a key demographic as the fight to control the spread of the virus ramps up ahead of winter. Children aged 5 to 11 have been unable to get vaccinated so far. That's caused significant challenges for families as schools attempt to crack down on symptoms like coughs to mitigate the spread of the highly contagious Delta variant. Some Canadian parents desperate to get their children vaccinated have resorted to taking them south of the border, where the Parents of the Year, where the Pfizer vaccine was approved for use in kids aged 5 to 11 on November the 2nd. Rochelle Walensky, director of the Centers for Disease Control, called the move an important step in that country's fight against COVID-19. Canadian health officials have said the country appears to be experiencing turbulence as cases rise, as the vaccination rate continues to rise. How could that be? Some sort of miasma? But again, pro forma, I'd like to remind you all that you should always listen to the experts, always listen to the science, because the experts and the science is always right. It may change, from year to year, from month to month, even week to week, but it is always right. And to not believe in the experts in the science is to be guilty of conspiracy mongering, which is the worst crime that exists. Senator Rand Paul, who is also a physician, has taken a very strong stand on this issue. This is from Steve Watson at Summit News. Appearing on Fox Wednesday, Senator Rand Paul continued his long-running exposition of Anthony Fauci, warning viewers that Fauci's latest comments provide yet another example of how brazenly authoritarian he is. Fauci stated earlier this week that Americans have a, quote, misplaced perception about individual rights as regards societal safety. Eric Schmidt commented, "These are the rantings of a tyrant who finds the Constitution inconvenient to his whims." Paul urged that it is alarming to see such casual disdain for individual freedom, as well as science, calling Fauci an authoritarian. Yes. This is a recipe for totalitarianism. It's a recipe for something we don't want in our country, Paul said. And let's go to a certain Substack, which is written by a man with the initials AB. His latest post, people appear to die at rates 20% or more above normal for weeks after receiving their second COVID vaccine dose, according to data from a huge Swedish study. Countervailing science. The figures are buried in a preprint paper on vaccine effectiveness released last month. The headline finding of the paper was that protection against COVID, including severe cases, plunged after 6 months. The researchers did not explicitly examine deaths from all causes, which have risen since the summer in many countries that have highly vaccinated population. But on page 32 of the 34-page report, a chart shows that 3,939 of the 4.03 million Swedes who received the second dose died less than 2 weeks later. Over a one-year period, that rate of death would translate into an annual mortality rate of about 2.5% a year, 1 person in 40, almost 3 times the overall Swedish average. In a typical year, about 1 in 115 Swedes dies. Conspiracy theories. Again, worst crime that exists, maybe even a greater crime than sexism or racism or transphobia. That's how serious it is. Here is a piece on the climate skeptic site whatsupwiththat.com by Eric Worrell. Shadows everywhere. The possibility that people might want to reject climate lockdowns and COVID lockdowns of their own volition does not seem to occur to the BBC. And, Mariana Spring, who is a specialist disinformation reporter with the BBC, had written COVID Denial to Climate Denial, How Conspiracists Are Shifting Focus. Members of an online movement infected with pandemic conspiracies, are shifting the focus and are increasingly peddling falsehoods about climate change. Matthew is convinced that shadowy forces lie behind 2 of the biggest news stories of our time and that he's not being told the truth. Recently, groups like the ones he's part of have been sharing misleading claims not only about COVID, but about climate change. It's part of a larger pattern, according to the BBC. Anti-lockdown and anti-vaccine Telegram groups, which once focused exclusively on the pandemic, are now injecting the climate change debate with the same conspiratorial narratives they used to explain the pandemic. The posts go far beyond political criticism and debate. They're full of incorrect information, fake stories, and pseudo-science. According to researchers at the Institute for Strategic Dialogue, a think tank that researches global disinformation trends, some anti-lockdown groups have become polluted by misleading posts about climate change being overplayed, or even a so-called hoax designed to control people. Increasingly, terminology around COVID-19 measures is being used to stoke fear and mobilize against climate action, said the ISD's Jenny King. She says this isn't really about climate as a policy issue. It's the fact that there are really neat vectors to get themes like power, personal freedom, agency, citizen against state, loss of traditional lifestyles, to get all of those ideas to a much broader audience. While we chat, he mentions the Great Reset, chatting with Matthew, an unfounded conspiracy theory that a global elite is using the pandemic to establish a shadowy new order, a super government that will control the lives of citizens around the world. The Great Reset is a public program promoted by the World Economic Forum, the group that holds a $50,000 a ticket event every year in Davos, Switzerland. A simple Google search turns up the WEF page near the top of the list of searches. The page cites COVID and climate change as justifications for their program. And I will add that Klaus Schwab, the Supremo of the World Economic Forum, published a book this year called COVID-19, The Great Reset. I was mentioning yesterday that apparently the use of the word neocon or neoconservative is evidence of anti-Semitism, despite the fact that the man regarded universally as the godfather of neoconservatism, Irving Kristol, a Jew, wrote 2 books with the word neoconservatism in the title. So again, we're back to Schrodinger's cat. This doesn't exist, but it does exist, and it's a good thing. In my opinion, there is room to debate the true nature of the Great Reset program, says our columnist, but calling it unfounded as in non-existent is at best plain ignorant and well below the BBC journalistic standards we once thought we had a right to expect. In Britain, there is a Malicious Communications Act, which makes it an offense to distribute written material which causes offense or anxiety. Oh dear. And has been used to arrest people campaigning against British government COVID policy. I am not a lawyer, but in my opinion, it is only a matter of time before this act is used against people who oppose other high priority government policies in Britain. Be careful what electronic footprints you leave. Your words could be misinterpreted. Above all, stay within the law wherever you live. That's easy enough to say, but the problem is that the interpretation of the law is never fixed. Here is an essay by Thomas Harrington at the Brownstone Institute, and it is called Václav Havel and the Semiotics of Public Masking. For me, Harrington begins, one of the worst inventions of the contemporary university is political science, a discipline that, with its mainly presentist and transactionalist orientation, tends to dramatically minimize the always very intimate relationship between politics and culture, especially the cardinal importance that public rituals have in every effort to radically reorient the operational concepts of the reality among the citizenry. When, in his speech to the US Congress 31 years ago, Václav Havel said that consciousness precedes being and not the other way around, he spoke not only as a politician, but as a man of culture, and more specifically, a man of the theater, a place where the semiology of the stage is often as important as the words that come out of actors' mouths. 13 years earlier, in the most decadent years of the Soviet period in Czechoslovakia, Havel wrote The Power of the Powerless, an essay in which he uses his very detailed understanding of the symbolic codes of the stage to explain certain mechanisms of the system of oppression then in force in his country. He focuses his exposition on a fictional manager of a fruit and vegetable store in his country who every morning puts up a sign in the window of his shop that says, "Workers of the world, unite." The playwright then wonders to what extent this gentleman and people passing in front of or entering the establishment believe in the words written on the poster. He concludes that the vast majority of them probably don't think much, if at all, about its content. Referring to the greengrocer, he goes on to say, quote, "This does not mean that his action had no motive or significance at all, or that the slogan communicates nothing to anyone. The slogan is really a sign, and as such contains a subliminal but very definite message. Verbally, it might be expressed this way. I, the greengrocer XY, live here and know what I must do. I behave in the manner expected of me. I can be depended upon and am beyond reproach. I am obedient and therefore have the right to be left in peace." This message, of course, has an addressee. It is directed above to the greengrocer's superiors, and at the same time, it is a shield that protects the greengrocer from potential informers, unquote. Harrington comments, in this way, according to Havel, the greengrocer is saved from a confrontation with himself and the feelings of humiliation that this inner encounter would bring on. Quote, "If the greengrocer had been instructed to display the slogan, 'I'm scared and therefore I'm unquestionably obedient,' he would not be nearly so indifferent to its semantics, even though the statement would reflect the truth. The greengrocer would be embarrassed and ashamed to put such an unequivocal statement of his own degradation on display in the shop window, and quite naturally so, as he is a human being and therefore has a sense of his own dignity. To overcome his complication, his expression of loyalty must take the form of a sign which, at least on its textual surface, indicates a level of disinterested conviction. It must allow the greengrocer to say, 'What's wrong with the workers of the world uniting?' Thus, the sign helps the greengrocer conceal from himself the low foundations of his obedience, while at the same time concealing the low foundations of power. It hides them behind the facade of something of high, and that thing is ideology, unquote. That COVID exists and has contributed to the deaths of many people is a fact, Harrington states. But the notion that it constitutes an unprecedented threat that requires the destruction of basic rights that have been hard won over the centuries is an ideological presumption, one, moreover, heartily disproven in places like Sweden, Belarus, and huge expanses of the so-called developing world. And then he lists the age stratified statistics of the infection fatality rate for the disease, recently compiled by John Ioannidis, one of the most prestigious biostatisticians in the world. So, as Havel reminds us, the mask's apparent lack of something does not mean that they have no motive or meaning. Yes, they have a very powerful meaning. And when I see people, even on a rainy and windy day in Victoria like today, wearing masks outdoors, these people are really straining at the leash to let the whole world know just how trustworthy they are. And, oh, yes, on the subject of masks, this is from Steve Watson at Summit News. Nancy Pelosi, who threatened to ban lawmakers from the House for not wearing masks, has once again been caught violating the rules. She clamors for others to follow. The Daily Caller notes that Pelosi was spotted with Representative Yvette Clarke, Democrat of New York, both maskless at a bar in the D.C. district where there is an active mask mandate. Note how she was holding a mask in her hand for when people start taking pictures, but not wearing it while mingling in the bar. The D.C. mandate, currently still in effect, states that masks must be worn inside any business or establishment open to members of the public, including but not limited to grocery stores, restaurants, and bars when not eating or drinking, places of worship, gyms, office buildings, libraries, indoor entertainment venues, and common areas of apartment or condominium complexes. Was Pelosi tricked into hanging out in the bar, just like she claimed she was last year at a hair salon in San Francisco? Clearly not. It's just that authoritarians like to enforce rules they don't follow onto everyone else. And let's just go to the Daily Skeptic, and we'll round this off. Okay. Oh, Julia Hartley Brewer tweets, if the government follows Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland to impose vaccine passports, I'll be fine. I've already got my QR code ready on my phone, and it is something rude. Lockdown loneliness has cost Australia 2.7 billion Australian dollars per year. Researchers from Curtin University in Perth have uncovered that COVID restrictions have exacerbated feelings of social isolation, leading to negative health outcomes, which have cost Australia $2.1 billion per year. This accounts for $1,565 for each person who is lonely, with young people and those living on lower incomes being impacted the most. I put no faith in any such estimates that such and such a thing causes damages. Yes, of course, COVID lockdowns cause damage, all sorts of damage. But the idea that this can be quantified seems to me to be ridiculous. Austria poised to impose a full lockdown. And yes, Gibraltar cancels Christmas celebrations. We talked about that yesterday. Novak Djokovic continues to support freedom of choice and hide his vaccination status. Comprehensive review of something studies finds no evidence of benefit. Let's go back to the chat. Ashuman Bravo says, Tedros Adhanom, the director of the WHO, was bankrolled by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the Clinton Foundation. No, but Bill and Melinda Gates and the Clintons, they're just concerned citizens who believe in health. Everyone believes in health, right? Also bankrolled by the World Economic Forum, founded by Klaus Schwab. What else? else do we have? Area 51 has militarized alien tech. Asia will have its work cut out for it, says Brandon Smith. Alex Jones named his son Rex, says Ashimane Bravo. Okay. It's not so much believing in the slogan as not believing that the oppressive regime believes in the slogan, says True a Green Bird. Unfortunately, I missed it, but the chat tell me if people were masked during Rittenhouse jury selection. Horned One, that's a new name to me. CRT isn't quite taught in schools officially, but it's pretty much everything adjacent to it is being pushed hard. Imagine kids with heads full of that stuff on juries. Texas Feral Hog says, LOL, I'm a Rexist with an irrational dislike of monarchs. Ashiman Bravo asks, why is Milo Greek name now hawking items on the Catholic Church's YouTube shopping channel? This is an official YouTube. Does the Catholic Church have a shopping channel, an official YouTube shopping channel? I don't know. They do the same thing with CRT, says Jim Edward. It doesn't exist, but it's a good thing. John S. says, eventually a Napoleon or Stalin will rise and put an end to our current ruling scum. That doesn't necessarily mean things improve, but they will be different. Kontiki Roulette says, very tiresome. I have not seen a single BBC article which was truthful and honest. They are so vile. And okay, let's go back to it here. Oh, Ricardo Williams says, I was a kid when OJ happened. I had no appreciation of how big of a star he was. Indeed, he was he was a college football star. He was a star with the Buffalo Bills. He later became a TV presenter. Was at Hertz commercials, in movies, Naked Gun movies. Yeah. And, maybe you've seen, like, the split screen. White people hearing the verdict, black people hearing the verdict, the black people whooping and hollering, and they couldn't be happier, and the white people absolutely stunned. Absolutely stunned. People die of all manner of things. One way people die is by drug overdoses. And when this story from the Daily Mail, Mansour Shaheen, talks about drug overdoses, it's referring to illegal drug overdoses. Hundreds of thousands of Americans die of accidental overdoses of prescription medicine every year. Typically, it's due to the combination of one or of two or more medicines. From April 2020 to April 2021, the first full year of the COVID-19 pandemic, a total of 100,306 Americans died of drug overdoses, according to a new report from the CDC. It's the first time that more than 100,000 overdose deaths were reported over a 12-month period, a 28.5% increase. Drug abuse, and specifically opioid abuse, has long been an issue in America, and the pandemic proved to be a setback in the nation's battle against overdoses. Why would that be, I wonder? Of course, in my own province of British Columbia, more people have died of drug overdoses than have died from COVID. But mysteriously, this is not considered as much of a health crisis, and the Canadian government is giving away free heroin to people. Yes, they are. Because the solution to people's lives being ruined by drugs, of course, is to give them free drugs. And we learned from CNN that CVS Health is closing 900 stores over the next 3 years, amounting to nearly 10% of its footprint, in response to the changing of consumer buying patterns. CVS wants the right kinds of stores in the right locations for consumers and for the business. A list of locations to be shut down was not released. Yes, the closures will cost the company about $1 billion in the fourth quarter of 2021. Affected employees will be offered jobs at nearby locations. Neil Saunders, a retail industry analyst and managing director of Global Data, said in a note to investors, that the closures are the result of CVS having too many overlapping locations and the dilapidated state of its stores that has pushed some of them into the downward spiral of irrelevance. Too many stores are stuck in the past with bad lighting, depressing interiors, messy merchandising, and a weak assortment of products. They are not destinations or places where people go out of anything other than necessity. I've got a pretty good idea where these to be closed CVS stores are located. And I'm sure, you're a smart group in the chat there, my listeners. You can figure it out. Let's talk about the clown show that is Canada. This is from CBC. The RCMP moved in Thursday morning to clear a Forest Service road in northern British Columbia that was barricaded by a crushed van and felled trees as Wet'suwet'en and Haudenosaunee members prepared for a final stand to block construction of a multi-billion-dollar natural gas pipeline. Jennifer Wickham, a media coordinator for the Gitminton checkpoint on the Morris River Forest Service Road, told CBC that police arrested at least 8 people, including 2 Wet'suwet'en elders and a legal observer. Wickham also said the RCMP are using at least 1 canine team. They are arresting everybody now. Coastal GasLink, the pipeline company, said in a statement at 3:15 p.m. that the RCMP had cleared the main forestry road of barricades. The remote logging road begins just west of Houston, 1,000 kilometers northwest of Vancouver, and is an old battleground. Twice in 2019 and 2020, the RCMP rolled up the road to clear barricades, arresting supporters of Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs who say proponents of the CGL pipeline project never obtained consent to cross their territory. This time, the line is stronger. There's more at risk. Molly Wickham, also known as Slado, a Gitminton clan member, sent an interview with CBC News. From an occupied and fortified CGL drill site, it has to be the final stand, then that's what's going to happen. It turns out that most of the Indian tribes in that area are in favor of the pipeline because when any of these projects, oil, gas, mining, jobs are provided and other benefits to the Indian tribes. But it seems that there's always one tribe, pissed off at the other tribes, that decides, no, this will not stand. And British Columbia is crisscrossed with overlapping Indian claims. Now, of course, the Indians, a large number of them, and certainly their elite and members of Canada's elite, have taken the position that Native Indians or Aboriginals, Indigenous, as we're supposed to call them now, own every single inch of Canada. And they have been encouraged. They've been encouraged in this by fatuous court rulings, which simply make things up, which are not in our Constitution. And as a result of this, the hashtag #ShutDownCanada was trending on Twitter today. And I had a look, and a deep vein of insanity was revealed. A Gitminton checkpoint says, "We will not back down." The time to take action in defense of Wet'suwet'en lands and waters is now. Yes, it's never struck me that Indian reserves in Canada are particularly pristine, Oh, and ranting about colonizers. Yes, the people who made Canada. The people who make Canada is entirely a European foundation. The polity or the culture that we call Canadian, Canada and Canadian, the Indians had nothing to do with it. Nothing whatsoever. Chris Malash says the Indian Act was put in place to stop uprisings, the ability to organize and stop Indigenous people from asserting land rights. Then Canada built military police to kill us either by death or by forcing us off our lands. Today is the same as it ever was. We need boots on the ground. We need solidarity actions throughout Canada. It's almost forgotten now. But before COVID stole the headlines, Indigenous and allies around Canada were blocking railway lines throughout Canada in an attempt to shut down the country. And our Prime Minister, Princess Rockstar, why it was asked, why aren't you doing anything about this? And he said, "Oh, I never tell the RCMP what to do." Ho ho. Very satirical. Someone called Nikita Danielle says, "Is it just me, or does it look like the RCMP are begging for another round of shut down Canada?" Now, someone called Taylor McNally, who is identified as she, her on her Twitter account, this is a black woman. She's a black woman. There may be some indigenous admixture there, but she's clearly a black woman. But she identifies as indigenous. While some folks worry about evacuating and ensuring their families are safe, indigenous folks worry about that and police violence because, I guess pigs have nothing better to do in the state of emergency. This woman is interesting, to say the least. She has a particular beef with the Calgary police, and she has tweeted that they're essentially a criminal gang. That's all they do. They serve no other function. It's interesting to me that before America's cities went up in flames last year, there was a rising movement to perhaps reconsider how the police operate. The militarization of the police, the tendency to shoot first and ask questions later, et cetera, et cetera. But that's all forgotten now. Good work. Black Lives Matter. Good work. Good work. Oh, here's the tweet from Taylor McNally, she, her. "All the Calgary police and all police is good at is silencing and killing Black and Indigenous people. That's literally their only purpose." Goes a bit far, wouldn't you say? But when you go to woke Twitter, I can spend hours and hours going down rabbit holes, because if you look at you follow the people whose tweets have been retweeted, then it just gets crazier and crazier and crazier. Here is someone called Claudette, who is a black woman. Oh, pronouns, she, her. She describes herself as infinitely blessed educator and dream keeper. And she tweets, "Black parents should get extra days off work so they can advocate for their children at work. The amount of time," these next words are all in block capitals, "time, effort, energy, resistance, research, and prep involved is just unimaginable. And still, I feel like I am dropping the ball sometimes. It's unfair, and I am tired." You must have noticed this, friends, that the loudest and most obnoxious and most active activists are constantly referring to themselves as being tired or exhausted. People who are exhausted do not engage in advocacy. But I don't know. They're trying to meme this into existence. There is a fine essay at American Greatness by Chilton Williamson, who I remember interviewing years ago. He was for a long time associated with National Review as a senior editor. And like many such people, he fled to Chronicles, which he later became the editor of. He's also a novelist, and a good novelist, actually. He has his piece is called "America, Immigration, and the Catholic Church." In respect to immigration, it's time for everyone, including devout and charitable Catholics, to think realistically and in practical terms about the subject. Exactly a quarter century ago, 4 years after my baptism and reception into the Church of Rome, I published a book called "The Immigration Mystique: America's False Consciousness," that was immediately and widely attacked on publication as being wrong on its facts, though no reviewer cited a single error, ignorant, heartless, bigoted, and in one case, poisonous. The book's subtext was substantially a critique of the contemporary church's apparently majoritarian view of the subject, an attempt to refute that view, which has not been materially altered in the past 25 years, but rather reiterated many times and restated with vigor. A lengthy editorial in the National Catholic Register. I used to write for the National Catholic Register. People confuse it with the National Catholic Reporter. The National Catholic Reporter is considered a left-wing Catholic publication, and the National Catholic Register is considered a right-wing Catholic publication. But this editorial in the NCR summarizes it in a more faithful and comprehensive manner than much I have read recently. It is based squarely on the Catechism of the Catholic Church, understood from the perspective of liberal Catholic opinion. While the Catechism is indeed a monumental volume grounded in text inspired by the Holy Ghost, the Constitution, written or unwritten, of a modern Western nation is not expected to directly reflect a religious text, especially one accepted only by a religious minority within that country. A state, in short, is not a church. Certainly it is not the church. For it to be otherwise would not only be terrible public policy, but atrocious theology as well, based on this instance on Catholic intellectual tradition, distorted by the confused liberal principles and sentimentalism that have compromised that tradition over the past century ago. A further problem is the editor's conflation of the moral duty and responsibility of an individual in his private and personal relationships with his dutiful responsibility as a member of a nation state in its relationship with another national state and its members. But the two, not being the same thing, should operate according to different moral laws and philosophical codes. Reinhold Niebuhr wrote a book at the middle of the last century called Moral Man and Immoral Society, in which he made roughly the same point, though to a different purpose. These differ because an individual act of charity toward another individual, rescuing a brutalized stranger fallen by the wayside, for example, has results that are narrowly circumscribed and more or less foreseeable. Meanwhile, acts of mass charity by a national government, such as admitting hundreds of thousands of people for an undeveloped nation for whom the word aliens is a better description than strangers, has nearly infinite consequences, most of them unforeseeable, confused, disruptive, potentially dangerous, and irreversible, as we are presently witnessing along the southwestern border. The Catechism recognizes the dangerous possibilities involved, as Paul Knies argues in his essay What the Catechism Says About Immigration, comparing the duties of a national government to those of parents safeguarding their families. Further, private charity is a personal act of sacrifice voluntarily made. For a government to admit tens or hundreds of thousands, even of millions of penurious, uneducated, and unskilled immigrants amounts to compelling forcible sacrifice on its citizens, with whose welfare alone it is constitutionally entrusted, on behalf of these aliens, an act that cannot be properly described as charity at all. In fact, as a general rule, Western ruling classes since World War II have welcomed mass immigration over the angry and resentful protest of their publics for purposes that benefit, beyond the immigrants, chiefly themselves and the rest of the elite class that appreciates the cheap labor, an expanded consumerist base, and an increased population that enhances what they call national greatness, and thus their own. Now, I mean, it's fairly obvious to me that if you look at the history of the Catholic Church, I mean, after the fall of the Roman Empire and the breakup of Europe into increasingly national states, that if the Catholic Church had argued, no, you can't have nations, and anybody from anywhere in the world must be allowed to flood your countries, the Catholic Church would have effectively dissolved. And this argument about, oh, what about the Holy Family? Well, it's an absurd argument because the Holy Family fled, a death sentence for children promulgated by King Herod. They fled to Egypt, which was another province of the Roman Empire. And when the threat went away, the Holy Family returned to Israel. But, I mean, everybody knows this. And so why is this argument still used? Oh, because, and it's used often by people who have no love for the Catholic Church or for Christianity or even religion. Oh, we're going to mention Jesus, so that means that you have to do whatever we say. And strange story from Calhan Rosenblatt at NBC News. Drag queens are being swatted while streaming on Twitch. They wanted to stop. Again, this is one of those headlines that, 5 years ago, people would have gotten. I don't. Was this badly translated from a foreign language? Deer, spelled Deere, the founder of the Stream Queens, says she is saddened by the continued threats, harassment, and invasions of privacy directed at drag queens on Twitch. So apparently, there is an audience for people. There's an audience of people who like to watch drag queens play video games on the internet. So, drag queen Elix, Elix, again, all weirdo names. All weirdo names. So apparently there's an epidemic of swatting. Swatting is, calling the police, false police reports, other ways, fake pizzas, all that sort of thing. Elix told NBC News, "I'm shocked. I'm gooped." Gooped? "I'm gagged that I wasn't scared. In my head, I'm like, my community is waiting for me." Elix, 37, a full-time Twitch streamer and partner with nearly 58,000 followers on the platform, is the latest victim in a spate of swatting incidents involving drag queens who stream themselves playing video games. So the curious thing that this story doesn't mention, how would it be possible for people to find out where these people live? Because their so-called drag names are not their real names. Oh, I am thinking I'm a person of color. I have a distinct name that's Hispanic. This is going to be a different experience for me, Elix said of her encounter with officers when she was swatted. But drag queens are men who dress up as women. So why is a female pronoun being used here? Since September, 6 members of the streaming group Stream Queens, a collection of drag queens who stream mostly horror video games on Twitch, have been swatted, according to members of the group. Okay. So when is the penny going to drop? Oh, in October, Mia Easy Lay, E space Z apostrophe Lay, Easy Lay, get it? Said she told local police in Connecticut she was worried she could be swatted after trolls began posting her address and phone number in the chat of her stream. Again, how would anyone know this? Well, okay. We find out that it would appear that a fair number of these Scream Queens, here we go. Jupiter Velvet, 24, was a full-time streamer before she was swatted in early September. Velvet, who is transgender, said police told her and an attorney there was nothing they could do about the swatter. After she left Twitch, Velvet said she turned to sex work and OnlyFans to subsidize her income. I guess that's a way for people to find out, where you live if you invite Johns to your home. About 45% of Black American transsexuals are HIV positive, which indicates to me that a very large number of them are sex workers, as the kids are calling prostitution now. Let's go to the chat. Ashy Man Bravo says stock rose sharply for drug maker Siga, who recently had smallpox drug approved by the FDA. Okay. Oscar Toe says maybe you only use the she, her pronouns when they are wearing a dress and it switches back when they are wearing pants. Hello to Steve Peppers. Red Ice did a stream wondering whether weaponized smallpox is next, says Ashameen Bravo. Yes, I've seen this chat. Okay. Quachalango says, which one of those Catholic mags made movie recommendations for children in the 1970s? The National Catholic Register has a movie reviewer. He makes recommendations. Okay, who else do we have here? Media hits. He wouldn't have stepped a foot on Caltech in response to Quetzalcoatl. Take action as long as it is legal, says Ashimane Bravo. Hello to Horned One or Horned One. Note the General Flynn urges people to peacefully take action, says Ashimane Bravo. Okay. I'm going to be moving very shortly to theater Thursday. And OJ played for the Bills. I thought Marshawn Lynch was the most popular black man to play for them. Doesn't Marshawn Lynch, I'm thinking Seattle Seahawks. I stopped following football 15, 20 years ago. I'll tell you why. You all know the joke that the NFL stands for National Felons League. And I was reading a news story which took place in Los Angeles, and it involved an assault, a beating. So there was a player for Chicago Bears who returned to LA, where he'd gone to USC, and he met a friend of his who had played on the USC team, who didn't make it to the pros. Anyway, they were at Denny's. I don't know, this was 11 or 12 at night. They were at Denny's, and there was a man at another booth who was tapping away on a laptop. And the two football players seemed to be strangely infuriated by this. And so they started shouting epithets at him, calling him a faggot and a Jew. It turns out he was Iranian. So they hatched a plan. They figured this fellow is going to have to use the bathroom, eventually. So one of the players went into the bathroom and waited. And as the Iranian got up from his booth and walked towards the bathroom, one of the other players followed him. So when he got into the bathroom, he had one hulking man in front of him and one hulking man behind him, and they proceeded to beat the shit out of him. Oh, I forgot that he responded bravely to the verbal abuse he was suffering, telling them to go F themselves, which was, I don't know, perhaps precipitous. But I read that story and I thought, I'm done with the NFL. Okay, let us go to Theater Thursday. And today I am talking about a film which came out in 1963 called Lord of the Flies. And of course, it is based on the first novel by Sir William Golding, published in 1954. And I'll have a little bit to say about Golding shortly. This film is available from Criterion in a beautiful, beautiful Blu-ray, which I can highly recommend the presentation. And the film was directed by Peter Brook. And Peter Brook was best known as a theater director. He was not known for his work in cinema. And this is a highly experimental film. Brook was known for his experimentalism as a director. So Lord of the Flies. Oh, I should mention that Lord of the Flies has been pressed upon high school students for decades, but now we are told that it should no longer be pressed on high school students because it's about a bunch of white boys, and of course, obligatory boo, because that could not possibly be interesting or relevant. Of course, it's about a bunch of white English boys who are trapped on an island in the Pacific after a disaster. Lord of the Flies has been tremendously influential because of its pessimistic view of human nature. Because the boys rather quickly revert to savagery. But not everyone is an admirer of Golding and Lord of the Flies and his worldview. And I was reminded when I was preparing this that Tom Sharp, the brilliant English novelist, one of the greatest, certainly one of the greatest comic novelists ever to come from England. He had written about Lord of the Flies in his novel Wilt, which is without question one of the funniest books I have ever read. The first time I read it, I was literally screaming with laughter, convulsed at many points. So I got to read a little bit from Wilt about Lord of the Flies. Henry Wilt was not a decisive man. 10 years as an assistant lecturer, grade 2, at the Fenland College of Arts and Technology was proof of that. For 10 years, he had remained in the liberal studies department, teaching classes of gasfitters, plasterers, bricklayers, and plumbers, or keeping them quiet. And for 10 long years, he had spent his days going from classroom to classroom with 24 copies of Sons and Lovers, or Orwell's Essays, or Candide, or The Lord of the Flies, and had done his damnedest to extend the sensibilities of day release apprentices with notable lack of success. Exposure to culture, Mr. Morris, the head of liberal studies, called it, but from Wilt's point of view, it looked more like his own exposure to barbarism, and certainly the experience had undermined the ideals and illusions which had sustained him in his younger days. So had 12 years of marriage to Eva. And so he talks about handing out copies of Lord of the Flies again and again and again to these students who do not want to talk about Lord of the Flies. For some reason, they want to talk about birth control and its benefits and risks. Wilt turned back to the Lord of the Flies reluctantly. He had read the thing 200 times already. Now, Piggy goes into the forest, he began, only to be stopped by another butcher who apparently shared his distaste for the misfortunes of Piggy. You only get bad effects with the pill if you use ones that are high in estrogen. And so he begins to fantasize about murdering his wife, who was really an appalling figure, say a proto-shitlib, you could call her. Motiveless, clueless, and indiscoverable, and proof that he was a man who could act, or wasn't. What if he broke down under the strain and confessed? That would be some sort of vindication, too. He would know what sort of man he was one way or the other, and at least he would have acted for once in his life. And 15 years in prison would be almost identical to 15 more 20 years at the Tech, confronting louts who despised him and talking about Piggy and the Lord of the Flies. Besides, he could always plead the book as a mitigating circumstance at his trial. Milud, members of the jury, I ask you to put yourself in the defendant's place. For 12 years, he has been confronted by the appalling prospect of reading this dreadful book to classes of bored and hostile youths. He has had to endure agonies of repetition, of nausea and disgust at Mr. Golding's revoltingly romantic view of human nature. Ah, but I hear you say that Mr. Golding is not a romantic, that his view of human nature, as expressed in his portrait of a group of young boys marooned on a desert island, is the very opposite of romanticism, and that the sentimentality of which I accuse him, and to which my client's appearance in this court attests, is to be found not in the Lord of the Flies, but in its predecessor, Coral Island. But, Milud, gentlemen of the jury, there is such a thing as inverted romanticism, the romanticism of disillusionment, of pessimism, and of nihilism. Let us suppose for one moment that my client had spent 12 years reading not Mr. Golding's work, but Coral Island to groups of apprentices. Is it reasonable to imagine that he would have been driven to the desperate remedy of murdering his wife? No. 100 times no. Mr. Ballantyne's book would have given him the inspiration, the self-discipline, the optimism, and the belief in man's ability to rescue himself from the most desperate situation by his own ingenuity. As it turns out, 11 years after Lord of the Flies was first published, we had a real life enactment of this. And this is a reference to the Tongan castaways. I'm reading from Wikipedia. A group of 6 boys aged between 13 and 16 In 1965, the boys ran away from a boarding school on the island of Tonga, stole a boat, and after a storm wrecked the boat, drifted to the abandoned remote island of Atta, where they were shipwrecked for 15 months. The boys formed a strong bond and, despite deprivations and injuries, kept themselves fit and healthy for the 15 months they were there. They fed on local wild birds, fish, wild taro. They captured feral chickens and found bananas that remained from being raised and cultivated on the island before it was evacuated 100 years prior. They captured rainwater using hollowed out logs, though it was sparse during the initial months of their survival. They drank blood from seabirds when they did not have enough water. There's a fascinating story in The Guardian by Kate Lyons called The Real Lord of the Flies, a survivor's story of shipwreck and salvation. The past few days have been something of a whirlwind for Sion Felipe Totau. The 73-year-old Tongan, who is commonly known as Mano, was living quietly in the Australian city of Brisbane when this week he was catapulted into the global spotlight after the story of how he and 5 of his friends survived for more than a year on a deserted Pacific island became a runaway hit. The article, an excerpt from Rutger Bregman's Humankind, was published in The Guardian entitled The Real Lord of the Flies, What Happened When 6 Boys Were Shipwrecked for 15 Months. It details how in 1965, Totau and his 5 friends, teenagers who were bored with their life at boarding school in the Pacific nation of Tonga, stole a fishing vessel and set off on an adventure. A huge storm destroyed their boat, and after 8 days drifting at sea, they washed up on a remote, uninhabited island. In the 4 days since its publication, it has been read more than 7 million times and shared by Russell Crowe, U.S. Senator Ted Cruz, and former Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull, to name a few. While for many, the story sounds like a boy's own adventure tale come to life, for Totau, the memories of the months spent on the island are far more harrowing. When the group first spotted the island of Atta after 8 days at sea, Totau risked his life to scout the place. We did not get to the island until nighttime in the dark, so I had to swim ashore, he says. I had to go first, and I told the boys, we have to say a prayer first before I hop in the sea. Despite the fact that the reef was not far from the boat, Totau said he had a very, very hard time reaching it because he was so weak from lying in the boat for 8 days without food, without water. When I reached the shore, I tried to stand up, and when I stand up, the whole world is spinning. So I laid down and crawled ashore, and when I touched the dry grass, then I lied down. The other boys called to him from the boat to see if he made it, but he was so weak he could not stand. He could only call out to them that he was alive. Eventually, the others made it to the island. We were very happy, but the first thing we did, we say a prayer, thank God for what he has brought us to. Then, desperate to quench their thirst, they hunted seabirds, drank their blood, and drained their eggs. Totau was interviewed for Bregman's account, which focuses on the positives of the story, the ability of the boys to cooperate and establish a functioning community that allowed them to survive for more than a year, in contrast with the characters in William Golding's novel, Lord of the Flies. Totau said that in general, the boys managed to settle it down and keep it in peace, though they did clash occasionally. They were, after all, 6 teenagers stuck together in a frightening situation. The boys were eventually rescued by Peter Warner, an Australian adventurer who was sailing around Tonga in 1966. I could not explain how we feel, all of us. We are full of tears, happy, and like we walk through to heaven, said Totau at the moment they spotted Warner's boat. One of the group, Stephen, swam out to meet it. The other boys gathered on the rocks, calling out to each other. Totau has nothing but praise for Warner, with whom he has since worked and considers a friend. But he says initially, Warner and his crew were fearful of the boys. They were so scared because we were all naked, long hair. We all hopped in the water and swam out to the boat. Mr. Warner did not put the ladder down because they were scared about us. But luckily, we could speak to him in English, and we talk. He gives us a few questions. He gives us a few photos from Tonga. He shows us a photo of our queen, and we say, yes, that's our queen, Queen Salote, sort of testing and trying to find out what we're telling him is true or not. When they returned to Tonga, the boys were imprisoned. The boat they had taken more than a year previously was stolen, and the boat's owner decided to press charges. And it was Warner who helped secure their release. He discovered they had been locked up when, after returning to Nuku'alofa, they had not shown up on his boat for a party he was throwing their honor. Totau says Warner walked the streets until 1 a.m. before he could find news of the boys, and he was eventually able to secure their release from jail by selling the Australian rights to the story to Channel 7, and using the money to pay for a replacement boat. But no good deed goes unpunished, as we shall see. Since the publication of Bregman's article, there's been a backlash among South Pacific Islanders. A key objection is the fact that the story of the boys was told largely from the point of view of the white Australian who rescued them. There was also anger at the explanation of why Ata was uninhabited. The island had been inhabited once until one dark day in 1863 when a slave ship appeared on the horizon and sailed off with the natives, wrote Bregman, who some felt was too cursory a reference to the devastating reality of the Pacific slave trade, which saw tens of thousands of people from the South Pacific kidnapped, tricked, or coerced into slavery around the world. Others have strongly objected to the revelation in the article that Warner owned and then sold the rights to the story of the boys' rescue. Yes. So there's the story of the real Lord of the Flies. Now, I'm not going to address the moral implications of this story. I'm just going to talk about it as a film. As previously mentioned, directed by Peter Brook. And the DP is Tom Holliman. So Brook was pretty much a novice in filmmaking, and Holliman had never operated a motion picture camera before. This film was shot in the Caribbean, in an island, island of Puerto Rico, and it is shot almost entirely in natural light, and a lot of it is shot at night or at the sunset. There is a particularly gorgeous shot, which is lighted entirely by a branch one of the boys has set on fire. And we see him holding this branch, again, the only illumination in the entire scene, and then he hurls it into the sea. And we watch the flame closer and closer to the water, and then it extinguishes. The film is shot in a black and white, and it is in the Academy ratio of 4:3, which of course was really not the done thing in 1964. The music is by Raymond Lepard, and Lepard was one of the great conductors of the 20th century. His Brandenburg concertos are outstanding. I have many other recordings by him, but he is best known for his work in opera, particularly the madrigals of Claudio Monteverdi, and his rescuing, if you will, of and casting rather in a modern form Baroque operas. This is a singular score. It's very heavy on percussion and the use of trumpets. And as far as I know, it's the only movie score that he wrote. So there's an aspect to this film, I don't know to what extent it's appreciated. The novel and the movie can be seen as an examination of class conflict. If you look at the story of the Tongan castaways, they were all of the same class, but this is not true of the boys in Lord of the Flies, the first film version. I'm not going to mention the second film version. It's terrible. Don't watch it. We see the three main characters in the film are Tom, Ralph, and Piggy. Now, Tom is Ralph, Jack, and Piggy, and James Aubrey. We see Ralph he was a chorister at the school. I should explain Why are they on this specific island? Because it would seem that World War III has broken out. And there is just a gorgeous and stunning montage of still photographs, mostly, that tell a story at the beginning of the film. There could have been a lot of boring exposition, but no. We see newspaper headlines. We see pictures of bombers. We see evacuation notices. We see pictures of the schoolboys in their school. We see a picture of a passenger plane. And this tells us, very simply and not taking up too much time, that the plane, the school children were evacuated and they were shot down, landing on the island. But we see right from the very beginning, and one of the first scenes, we see Ralph, played by James Aubrey. These were all real boys. They were not actors. And Ralph meets a boy, and the boy sees a conch, and he shows Ralph how to blow the conch. And Ralph is not very good at it first, then he gets better. And the sound of the conch brings all of the boys who have survived to this beach. And Ralph has the conch, and it's decided that there will be a vote, very democratic, for who's going to be the leader of this little community, because they realize they need organization, they need hierarchy. One of the groups that comes to the beach is quite a spectacle. It is a bunch of boys wearing academic hats, ruffed collars, and long black gowns. They are choristers, and they're singing, chanting as they march down the beach, Kyrie, Kyrie, Kyrie eleison, which becomes very ironic in the course of the film. And the head chorister is called Jack. Jack speaks in the clipped tones of the upper class, posh, real posh, not fake posh. And there is no question, Jack makes it clear. I am the head chorister at a better school than yours, so I deserve to be in charge. Now, Ralph is very solidly middle class. You could call him upper middle class. Piggy, he gets this nickname because he very foolishly told Ralph that this was the cruel nickname which afflicted him at his school, and you learn a lesson from this. If nothing else, you learn a lesson. If you don't know this lesson already, don't tell secrets to people, because people are bad at keeping secrets. And Ralph starts blurting away that he's called Piggy. Boys like to get laughs, and they don't really care how they get their laughs. And everyone finds this is very amusing. And so he is known as Piggy, which serves the function of dehumanizing him. So there's a vote, and Ralph is elected as the leader of this little commune. But Jack is determined to distinguish himself. And so their first task is to keep the fire going. And they blunder at this. It shouldn't be that hard of a job, but it's not very exciting keeping a fire going. And so Jack decides that Jack has a knife, and they are going to go hunting. And they find a feral pig, which they slaughter. And of course, they had been eating a vegetarian diet, everyone, and even Ralph and Piggy are delighted by this because, they are meat eaters. And we see that Jack slowly, he increases his role, his control. He is to the manner born. There is no question in his mind, because, he is posh, he is upper class, that he should be in charge. And presumably comes from a family of generations of men being in charge, not just in Britain, but around the world. Ralph, I guess you could see him as a liberal. That in any society such as theirs, hunters are going to be highly prized. Hunters are highly prized in all primitive societies for obvious reasons. But we had a vote, Jack says, and I was voted. Well, sure, but Jack and his lot essentially desert. They are the hunters. They can provide meat. What can you do? All you can do is talk. There is a boy in the middle called Simon. He's a little blonde-haired boy, and he's very quiet. And he is perhaps the most intelligent of the lot, and he is beautifully played by Tom Gammon in this role. He just seems very mysterious. This is clearly, there's a lot that he's thinking that he is not willing to say. We also have a pair of twins, Sam and Eric, who are referred to singly as Sam and Eric. And the younger boys are quite taken in by Jack's bravado. And, well, there's a revolt. Jack and his cohort leave. And who do you want to be with? Do you want to be a hunter like us? Or do you want to be a boring person who, eats leaves or whatever and talks? Well, no, these boys want to be hunters. And Jack institutes a reign of terror on the island. They discover that they can make themselves up like tribal savages, which they proceed to do. And of course, this seems like, a young boy, and these are boys before puberty, would love to do that. Acting out the role of a savage in a jungle, and but for real. And so the let's say the rationalist group is reduced to Piggy and Ralph, but the hunters have need of Piggy because he wears spectacles. They are they're pretty good at building shelters, but apparently they have not learned at scouts or whatever make a fire. But they are intelligent enough to know that you can make a fire using a pair of spectacles, the lenses in a pair of spectacles, as a magnifier. So they steal Piggy's glasses. So he has not only been dehumanized, he is now effectively blind. And as we learned from the beginning, he is weak because he suffers from asthma, as he calls it. Now, we have two groups, and the second group is a group of two. But the hunters, led by Jack, determined that they cannot allow any kind of dissent. No, all for one and one for all. And so the hunters are going to hunt down Jack and Piggy for sport, really. We see a wholesale degeneration of behavior amongst the hunters that and this is really well done in the film. You have a bunch of boys, out on the beach at sunset with a roaring fire and tell them to go crazy, and they go very convincingly crazy indeed. There's a religious aspect or anti-religious aspect to the book and the film. The beast. Something on a recce of the island. Something strange is discovered. Strange and horrifying is discovered. And it is called the beast. And boys start ascribing supernatural powers to it. So at the same time, there is this fear of the beast, which is used to compel, complicity and loyalty to the hunters. But it also serves a religious purpose in that the hunters see themselves as providing sacrifices to placate the beast, their god. And one of the sacrifices is a pig's head, a boar's head, on a post, which is covered, called the Lord of the Flies, after Beelzebub in the Bible. And the film ends in terror, as Piggy is murdered. A giant rock. This is foreshadowed nicely near the beginning of the film, where a giant stone, which had been presumably sitting at a height for some time, one of the boys pushes it down, crushing all this wildlife for fun, because boys like breaking things. And Piggy is killed in a similar manner, and then that just leaves Ralph, who is forced to run for his life. And I have to say, one must give tremendous credit to Peter Brook, the director, because as mentioned previously, children do not know how to act. They have to be told. In the absence of direction, they are terrible actors. They're either flat or hamming it up. And the terror that we see from Ralph as he's being hunted for sport is really something quite to behold. And there is deliverance at the end, but the movie ends, and we are left with the thought that these boys had learned something about themselves or about human nature that it would perhaps be best for them not to know. I've seen this film a number of times, most recently, a week ago. It is an enthralling movie from beginning to end. Everything comes together: the setting, the actors, the music, the direction. It is a thrilling and unnerving experience. And apart from the reservations about Golding's worldview, which I expressed through the words of Tom Sharp, I could prove this movie highly, without any reservations. It is a unique experience. So those are my thoughts on The Lord of the Flies. Let's have a final look at the chat. Enron, James Aubrey, went on to play Shackleton in The Last Place on Earth. The actor who played Robert played Friedrich in The Sound of Music. I have seen The Last Place on Earth many, many times, and I remember Aubrey as Shackleton. The Last Place on Earth is about Amundsen versus Scott. It was filmed for English in Greenland, or English television. It's just tremendous. Let's see. Popcasso88 says, I remember being bored by the movie, but it could have been because I was in school. Yeah, that was largely my experience. That, they're going to make me read a book, are they? Just, mulishness, bloody-mindedness. Well, I'm not going to like this book because they made me read it. Although they made us read Moonfleet, Tale of, smuggling and adventure, which was later filmed by Fritz Lang. And I quite enjoyed Moonfleet. Let's see. Popcasso88 says, KMG, do you plan on staying in Victoria when you get your money? Well, I can't travel. I can't go back to the mainland because I'm not allowed to get on ferries. Some people have suggested that I move up island. I'm loath to do that because I've lived in Victoria for 21 years. I came here knowing almost nothing about the place. Now I know a fair amount of it, for instance, where everything is. And I know people here. And if I move to a new place up island, I don't want to have to reinvent my life at the age of 66, you know. And it's difficult. It's difficult enough at my age, making friends. And I wouldn't want to start again, in a place I don't know. Don Willis says one more thing. When I hear the word port, I think first of drink, then cheese, then of course the song Brandy by Looking Glass. Respectable commenting name says I was bored by the movie in school because we watched the American version. I'm not sure I fully agree with this point on kid actors that Kevin has made many times. Well, if you look at Danny in The Shining, it was Kubrick's assistant who was coaching him. Spent a great deal of time with this boy, and apparently he was so good with this boy that he didn't understand what the movie was about. He didn't understand that it was a horror movie. And Danny, of course, is had not been an actor before. He was chosen in an audition, and he gave a great performance. What else do we have in the chat? Balthazar is also Semitic, Balthazar or something like that. Says Red Sulfur. Balthazar, wasn't it one of the names of the three wise men? Ohazar Balthazar by Robert Bresson, which is about a noble donkey, is my second favorite film ever made. I'll warn you, it is very sad. Very, very sad. Okay. My favorite part of Lord of the Flies is that decades later, whenever I hear someone having a coughing fit, I still yell, "Sucks to your asthma" at them, says Neil Terry. A good one. A good one. Okay. Red Sulfur says, off to dinner and some dummity on Fox. Good night, y'all. Y'all? Okay. I think that's, Popcasso 88 says, I don't remember it that well. Haven't seen it since 93. The teacher put it on so she didn't have to do anything for 2 classes. That's the best part of teaching, isn't it? Okay. So, Kevin, at what age can people actually act? Well, certainly not until puberty. And I would say, I don't know, let's say 15. That's arbitrary. Okay. I'm just going to say 15. Moonfleet was my favorite book as a kid, says Halper. I put off reading Lord of the Flies until adulthood. So I had a better perspective on it. And best child performance, The Boy in Bicycle Thief, says Halper. So we're talking about sad movies now, are we? No, I reviewed Bicycle Thieves on Theater Thursday, and that boy, he has so much spirit, and I love the scene where his father decides, you know what? We're gonna go to a restaurant and we're gonna have some pasta and I'm gonna drink some red wine, and I really shouldn't be doing this, but nothing else is working. And so he's Bruno, the boy. He's not used to being in a place like this. And there's some Richie Rich type at another table who keeps looking over at Bruno and his father, and the look on his face says, "What are they doing in here?" Very amusing. Okay. Thank you, Don Willis. What is coming up on the show? Let's see. Tomorrow is the book club, and I'm going to be talking about a book about songs about death and disaster, murder, and such like. It is called I Shot a Man in Reno by Graham Thompson. Of course, on Music Monday on November 22nd, it's time for some fun. Let's talk about Disco Demolition Night, 1979, Comiskey Park, Chicago. And on, let's see, the next Theater Thursday, a lighter film, although it has some tragedy in it. It's called An Affair to Remember by Leo McCarey from 1957. And it stars a great-looking couple, Deborah Carr and Cary Grant. So I'll be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. Thank you all for tuning in. Again, as I said at the top of the show, or near the top of the show, I found out from my father's estate lawyer that some money will be released to me in a couple of weeks, whatever that means. When that happens, I will be I will be a person transformed. Okay. But until then, I am in dire straits, and I face the prospect of being homeless in 6 days. So if you find it in your hearts to donate to this live stream, the PayPal account is Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. Once again, Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. And if you are in Canada, donations may be made to the live stream directly via interact@kevingrace@shaw.ca. So as always, I leave you with this benediction. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.